This is Foodie Call on the G1 podcast.
Hi, this is Chuck from Cali Kitchen.
Hi, my name is Thomas. I'm the private chef for the Ambassador.
James Yu, Windy City Pizza.
And I am GP. We are Foodie Call. You want to do a special introduction there, Chuck? You worked up a song for us, didn't you?
Yeah, it was like Foodie, Booty, Holiday Inn.
Yeah. Is that it? Is that all you got? Welcome back to Foodie Call, everybody. If you missed out on the last episode, we talked about authenticity, and we debated where it's going, where it's headed, what sacrifices can and cannot be made, what is tolerable. And on this particular edition, we're moving on to dining expectations, a topic suggested by Thomas over here. So this time around, dining expectations. Let's set up a baseline, everybody. So if you haven't figured out, I am the only person here without serious dining chops or culinary chops. I'm sort of the layman, the odd man out of the group. I'm super basic. Actually, I cook most of my meals at home, and I don't really care what they are too much. I'm all about value. So that's where I'm coming from in terms of expectations. Chuck, you feel very, very differently than I do.
Dining expectations? That's like such a very broad thing, but I guess for me, I just go in with like kind of what they're advertising. I try to take a meal for what it is. So I don't want to go to a salad place and be like, why don't they have more fried stuff, you know? Like
yeah, that'd be absurd, right?
Exactly. But I feel like a lot of people approach things that way, where it's like if you're going, for something more traditional, don't expect something that's all fancy, So I think a lot of people I judge a restaurant or a meal on what it's advertising it as, So for me, I think a lot of times in Korea, we get mad because things are misadvertised or misinformed, We feel that way.
I'd agree with that. So you form your expectations based on how the restaurant labels itself, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. Thomas, I have no hesitation in labeling you as the most pretentious of the four of us.
Okay.
Care to refute?
Pretentious? No.
No. Okay. Go ahead. Frame your expectations for the listeners.
Actually, I agree with a lot of what Chuck said, but I also think that when you go into a restaurant, there is some hype about the restaurant that certainly plays a part. If a restaurant is hyped up by so-called other foodies, then you're going in there with a much higher expectation than even what if the restaurant marketed itself as. So that also plays a role. But I go into a lot of restaurants, I actually set my standards lower because I don't expect much of many places. Unless it's someone that actually really I trust, then I will go in there with a higher expectation. But otherwise, if it's something that I just read, if it's not from a credible source, I will go in with lower expectations. And a lot of times it still doesn't meet my standards. So,
well, that is the secret to happiness, low expectations.
Yes.
So.
This is why I'm such a happy guy.
James, let's move on to you. How do you frame your expectations for us? Give us some perspective here.
I just want the food to be good. Honestly, that's my only expectation. I feel like if I'm going to pay money, whether it's a little bit or a lot, I just want the food to be good. Nothing upsets me more than, let's say, paying a decent amount of money, not necessarily high or low, but like a good amount of money for bad to average food. I feel like that's a complete waste. I would rather spend twice or three times as much, have a good meal, or spend much, much less and just have really good kimbap or jjigae or something like that.
Okay, so pretty basic. Actually, we're on the basic side of the table over here. Let's move on to the name of this segment, Foodie Call, right? I don't know if I would describe myself as a foodie, only maybe because I'm on this segment would I ever admit to being so. I'm pretty basic. But would you consider yourself a foodie, and what does that even mean to you?
I think it's kind of a word that's thrown out a lot. And
certainly.
A lot of us have might have like warm, fuzzy feelings, or they might have disdain. For me in general, I don't think I like being lumped into a group where I feel like I'm not really, subscribing to everything that those people are doing per se. But I guess just in the purest sense, a foodie is someone who goes out of their way for food, in my opinion,
And are you one of those people?
even when I'm, was back in Orange County, I would drive over to Santa Barbara, which is like an hour and a half drive, just to grab some sea urchin from like the guys who were diving that day. So for me, it's like
That's pretty hard. Yes.
yes.
Okay.
So yes.
I'm actually not the biggest fan of the word foodie because it does have some connotations with it. But to me, a foodie is basically someone who loves food. And if it was used in that sense, I would have no problems with the word. But it's taken on a life of its own, actually. And there are some bad connotations. And
Could you talk about some of those bad connotations?
I think just because someone says that they're a foodie, they automatically think they're an expert on food, which is not the case. If we just left the definition of foodie as someone who enjoys food, that would be perfectly acceptable. But it doesn't automatically make you an expert on food.
Just like how not everyone who listens to music is an expert on music.
Right.
You're not a musician just because you listen to music,
Exactly.
I would say, right?
Exactly.
But also, I think there are other connotations of like, oh, foodies can be pretentious, like
Hipsters.
Yeah, hipsters taking a lot of pictures.
I'm not going to pretend that's not me.
Hey, I'm not saying we haven't all done it here.
James, you a foodie? By your own definition.
Are we talking like by the definition of taking pictures of food? Well, I feel like I probably take more pictures of food than most, but I'm definitely one of those people that live to eat. It's very different from, let's say, my father who just eats to live. He'd be happy just eating peanut butter and jelly sandwiches all day long for every meal. But for me, food is actually a fairly important part of my life. I will definitely go out of my way to try and find good food. But aside from that, that's really pretty much it for me, Like they had mentioned earlier, the word foodie has sort of gone in the way of the word hipster. There's definitely a stigma to the word, and that I'm not really keen on.
Yeah, there's certainly a stigmatism attached to it. Okay, so let's move on from that. What typically sets expectations for you guys? Is it price? Is it hype? Is it perceived authenticity? A mixture of all these things? Is it even just the location? Because a lot of times you'll go to a theme park and be like, oh, that was really good for a theme park, but then you would not settle for that anywhere else. I mean, all these things play a really big factor. For me personally, it's a lot about the value and what the general field is like. So if we've gone to this before, but if you want a particular type of ethnic food, let's say if you're really into South African food, I can only name one restaurant in Itaewon that serves South African food. I'm not saying there's not more, but only one that I know of, and thus my expectations are only of that place, right? There's no other competition. So that's largely how I frame my expectations.
But with you, that when you just said theme park and you set your expectations and you say it's not bad for a theme park, I also think that a lot of that actually happens here in Korea as it is, where people say, well, it's good, but it's good for Korea.
Right.
Sure.
And I won't mention certain restaurants, but I will say that some of these restaurants, if they were located in the U.S. with prime competition, I would think they would be out of business within 6 months.
Certainly. Is that what frames expectations for you, though? I mean, that's not the reality we really live here.
Well, because we're living in Korea, I think some of the expectations are lowered, actually, because of, and it's not always the fault of the restaurant. There are some ingredients that are hard to acquire here in Korea, so there are some leeway.
I think when we talk about like low expectations for things, and personally, I think it is kind of a cop out, as in like that's the situation, but that's also like a cop out. Like that's all we can do here.
Sure.
And I think a lot of it has to do with like experience and knowledge, in the sense of, we talk about always like our audience, right? How experienced are they? How much knowledge do they have about this? And I think because of a lack of knowledge sometimes, or a lack of experience, I think people feel like they can get away with really stupid things, highway robbery, right? So it's like pass something off as, authentic Chicago pizza,
That was filthy. Throwing some shade there.
No. I'm not talking about Windy.
out there.
I'm not talking about Windy City, but I'm talking about there's
That
most.
direction of your head.
I know, right?
I know. You could have been more subtle.
Good thing
on
I'm
that
far
one.
away over here.
Wow,
You could have looked at me while you were saying that.
that's true. But then I felt like then I would be avoiding. But there's a lot of things a lot of claims lots of misinformation.
Yes, authentic, original.
Right, exactly. And so I think that's kind of where I get hung up. Because I don't think we have a problem with things that are different. But when things are, when you feel like you've been, I don't know, bamboozled. I don't know, you've been tricked. Yeah, misled. I think there is a sense of justice, and we're like, that's wrong,
Sure.
And I think that's where we get stuck a lot, especially because most of the foreigners are are coming from, a more diverse background, when they're eating, whether it's in Itaewon or in Korea, and they're like, why is it like this? My experience and my, previous information does not match up to what I'm experiencing right now.
Especially for tourists who stay here a longer time and they stay with one of us or something like that, where you actually like, oh, I'm kind of tired of all the Korean food we've been having, and you take them somewhere else, and you have to give them that disclaimer that's like, hey, we're gonna go get Mexican food, but blah 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 blah.
Don't expect.
Yeah, don't expect cilantro or whatever. So you have to frame your expectations relative to that.
I mean, going back to that previous point, I think we're at a point now where things are slowly starting to change, where people aren't like, they're not happy with well, it's good for Korea. That may have been the way it was 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5, maybe even up to 5 years ago. But things have slowly started to sort of turn towards the other side, to where there are a lot of decent things that you can find. And I've had conversations with other people. Like, Seoul is one of the few places that I know where you have such a diverse range of foods out there. And if you wanted that sort of quality of all of those different types of food back where you lived, unless you lived in a big city, you probably wouldn't find it, right? You would actually have to go quite out of your way to try and get the amount of quality food that you can actually find here. So that's sort of a nice thing. As far as expectations for food, I think price definitely plays into a part of it. The more expensive the food, the better, naturally, the better you expect it to be.
But however, when you say that, let's say, for example, we're at, let's say, 100,000 Korean won price point, and
it better be a pretty damn good meal, otherwise I'm going to be upset.
But even a hotel buffet?
It better be a pretty damn good meal, or I'm still going to be upset. Otherwise, that may be a big part of the reason I don't eat a lot of hotel buffets. Right. I think the money is better spent elsewhere.
But I think, at least, I'm not sure about GP, but I think the three of us would agree that we set a lower expectation for a hotel buffet when we spend 100,000. We're expecting a lower quality of food, I guess.
I think that's just sort of come from having gone,
right,
and having been disappointed. And if you have to go, then
right,
you sort of suck it up and pay
sure,
it, knowing that, all right, it's gonna sort of suck, but you got to do it anyways.
Sure.
Kind of like going to a wedding a little bit sometimes, right? You got to pay that amount of money. Let's take a turn. What? So I can't be honest here?
No, it's true.
No, it's so true that it's funny.
Yeah, right. Let's take a turn now. Expectations, we've kind of been talking a lot. We frame a lot of things in terms of foreign food, but we are here in Korea. Setting expectations for Korean food, right? I find that, when people are like, oh, I really want to go to a really high-end Korean restaurant, there's not that many options. I struggle to name even one. Usually, Korean food really sets itself within this price range for a certain type of food, and it is what it is. You're gonna pay more for duck than you will for pork, right? And you're gonna pay more for hanu than you will for any of those things. And those are all just the kind of brackets, and they don't really exist outside of that. Expectations are set. You know what you're getting.
At least for me, like when I go to Korean food, I don't really look for high-end Korean food. At least the Korean foods that I'm sort of used to, all my favorite Korean foods are sort of what I would call like peasant food. Like gejang,
right, comfort
budae-jjigae,
foods,
salongtang, like soups, stews, those types of things.
So your expectations are very much met then.
Yes, I expect them to be filling. I expect them to be just full of flavor. And in the case of something like budae-jjigae, I want there to be like a lot of fake Spam and hot dogs and noodles in it, and I want it to be salty and good.
I actually want the real Spam.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm just used to the fake Spam.
Right.
So Korean food, I mean, this is Korea. It should be, it should always meet expectations. But I feel like we're all just saying, yeah, Korean food meets expectations. Those expectations, low.
I don't think they're necessarily low. I think for me, something I was sharing actually with James during lunch was that my expectations of Korean food, they're largely shaped by my upbringing and my, surrounding in Orange County, LA. And, it's a very different experience than over here. So even something simple like when I came to Korea for the first 6 months, I would go to restaurants and ask for, hey, do you guys have brown rice or different rice? And they look at me like, hey, stupid, why are you asking this? You know? And for me,
Don't they still ask you that?
Yeah, thanks. But I mean, in LA, it's actually the norm, you know? As in most restaurants, even if you go get a rice bowl somewhere or Chipotle or whatever, it's just assumed that you would have other rice options, you know? So even stuff like that, it was kind of weird trying to adjust to in Korea. But for me, I think...
yeah, there is a surprising number of limitations, and there's a very finite window you'll be accommodated.
Right.
Even when you're willing to pay more or ask for less, sometimes you're like, hey, can you not put this in? And they're like, why wouldn't I?
Yes.
Right.
And I think that's what's also different about like Korean food in the States, where it has evolved in some ways, you know, like some things I think are even better, I would say, like, you know, arguably like some Korean barbecue, or even I for me personally, I think sundubu is a lot better, you know, in the States, as a general rule, you know. I have high expectations for Korean food, but for me, when I go to Korean restaurants, a lot of times they take too many shortcuts. Like I feel like there aren't as many restaurants that do it the right original way, like the slow, you know, 정성, like all the effort and love put into the meal. So I think that's why personally,
you sound like a grandmother in the best possible way right now, Chuck.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love it.
But for me, the best Korean food I've had is always outside of Seoul. It's always in some like random corner that I didn't expect, and it's just, I feel like it's because they're not catering to the fast, the quick, the cheap.
I know that a lot of the Korean restaurants here in Seoul are using MSG or using MSG byproduct,
Right.
and it's all about convenience and speed. So
Yeah, so that brings me back to this point I was thinking about earlier is, you know, sometimes you can go out of Seoul. A lot of times you go out of Seoul and have amazing Korean food, right? There are regions all over Korea that are known for a specific type of food, but I found that generally foreign food is extremely lacking in those other places.
Oh, yeah.
And do you adjust expectations for that as well? Are you like, oh yeah, I'm gonna have a foreign meal and we're outside of Seoul, and so I'm gonna lower my bar, I'm gonna expect to pay more, get less? Is that something that you guys feel like that is something I feel when I leave the city?
actually, when I leave the city and I travel around Korea, which I do quite often, I actually do not eat Western food. I'm actually eating the local Korean foods. And
Why is that?
just to get a baseline for the food's differences in different areas of Seoul, different areas in Korea. So I've learned throughout the travels that my favorite is actually in Jeonju, or Jeollado food. And it's much, much flavorful than anything here in Seoul, including every single banchan or side dish that you get. So that's my take on it.
Okay.
I did actually, however, have one burger that was in Jeonju, which was pretty outstanding, actually. It was a homemade burger. And
Care to give them a shout out? Do you remember the name of the place?
I do not, but they were cheap. It was like 3,000 won per burger. So I sat there. I had 3 burgers and a beer, and it cost me, I believe it was like 12,000.
That's ridiculous.
So it was like ridiculous.
I'm like, and now I'm struggling not to look over at the prices on the Cali Kitchen menu, which is where we're filming. Like, I'm sorry, Chuck.
We are in Itaewon.
Yeah, we are in Itaewon. We are not wherever.
What can we
that
get for
is.
12,000 here?
You can get a lot for 12,000 actually.
What we are gonna get is moving on to the next thing, guys. Okay, so we talked about expectations for foreign food in the city, outside of the city, and Korean food as well. And let's talk about something else, because sometimes when you're paying, you're not just paying for the price of food. As anybody who's ever been on a date ever will tell you, you're also paying for ambiance. You know, sometimes you're paying for a place where you can be, you can have a quieter conversation, or you can be a little more intimate and set the mood. You're also paying for service sometimes, and sometimes you're paying for location. You know, how do you adjust for all these factors? Are you willing to pay more for ambiance when you need it? Are you willing to pay more for convenience? Just how much more? For me, it's all about really location and convenience. For ambiance, I kind of I'm pretty basic, right? If I'm looking to go somewhere that sets a certain mood, then I'm willing to actually go out and seek out that place and shop around and make sure that I'm not getting hosed and paying too much. But for me, usually location, I'll be willing to pay a little bit more if the location is right and it's convenient. I don't have to go out of my way during the day.
As far as ambiance, I suppose ambiance is important when you're trying to spend quality time with a particular person and you're looking for sort of like one-on-one, and you want that ambiance to sort of set the mood, right? It's nice when, let's say, for example, if you're on a date, when you're not at someone too, or you're not somewhere too particularly noisy, and in those type of places, you would hope that the food is also good, and sort of along the line with that, that the service is also good. And that sort of all comes packaged together in a particular restaurant, right? And usually you'll get the ambiance and you'll get the service. It's usually just the food that is sometimes suspect, right?
Yeah, that's generally kind of the thing, right? Sometimes you're paying more and you feel like, the food wasn't that great. Maybe it looks pretty good,
Right.
so you can Instagram it, but otherwise you're just like, right?
But when you're going there, but if it's about ambiance, it's not always about the food. It's more about the experience and having a good time with whoever you're there with. So sometimes the food will get a pass. It just needs to be passable, right? You just need to not think about the food or not have the food be bad enough to where you're like, oh, this is awful, right? So in those cases, as long as the food is good enough to where you don't notice it's bad, then it's fine. But when you're going there for a meal and when the food is the main topic, then it's not so much the ambiance that's important, it's the food that's important and how it's served to you that's important, because that's what you're going to remember.
Do you think some restaurant owners are like just fully aware of that, embrace it, and are like, we're not going to hire a chef that's particularly talented. We just need one that can do good enough so that people keep coming because we make it up in ambiance and service?
I don't think so.
No, I can say I know for a fact that's the case.
Oh yeah, okay.
Like I've talked to places where, like, I've pressed them because I know owners and I'm talking to them. I'm like, so like, these things don't meet the standards of what you're trying to do here, and they're like, no, people come here to drink. People come here, for other reasons, and so they're gonna settle.
They're going to play towards those reasons.
Right.
But was it a bar or was it a restaurant?
Yeah, mostly bars, right?
Wow,
Yeah.
okay.
Mostly bars, but a lot of them are really pushing some of the food. Where I'm like, that's why I ask, because I'm like, how are you pushing the food when it doesn't meet up to, and they're like, people will drink, so they will buy.
Can you blame them though? Do you blame them? I don't. If it's a bar, I don't blame them. I'm just kind of
If
like,
it's a
whatever.
bar, the main focus shouldn't be the food. Actually, it isn't the food. It's about selling the drinks, and basically the food is just a supporting role to make sure that they keep on drinking. So I don't think I would blame them.
But for me, I feel like, even recently, I went to a place, they had pretty good drinks, but the food was so bad that it just kind of stopped the flow. I feel like as much as food plays a supporting role, I think it plays an important supporting role. I think if the food is great, people are going to drink more. People are going to stay longer. People are going to enjoy. The experience becomes more unique. The beer scene is growing in Korea, where there's a lot of great places to drink craft beer. But there's almost no place that has great craft beer and great food. Because once you combine those two things, then you're like, hey, I can't go anywhere else but here. Because right over here in Gyeongnidan used to be the only place where you can get a lot of craft beer.
Yeah.
But now you can get it at a lot of places. But most of those places, even Gyeongnidan, doesn't have great food paired with it. So I think for me, that's kind of the next step. When we think of, for instance, Father's Office in LA, there's a reason why people go there. People don't go there just for the burgers. People don't go for their really good beer selection. They go over there for both. And I think once you have both, it becomes a combination that becomes irreplaceable.
Food for thought. I like that. That's a really good point. Wow. You gonna hand that to him, Thomas? You gonna hand that point to him? You gonna say, "Attaboy, Chuck"?
Actually, no.
No.
No, actually, you can call me pretentious, you can call me whatever you want, but in terms of beers and the craft beer scene, it's taken off quite a bit. I am actually not a big beer person. And when it comes to quality food matching up with beers, I still think food is in a supporting role. I don't think of it as an equal partner there. When you think of like great wine bars, of course you actually do need to have great food that pairs with the wines. But when it comes to beers, even if you're drinking a quality craft beer, like let's say Ballast Point, do you really need a great pizza, or do you really need a great hamburger to go with that beer? My answer would be no.
But I don't think I'm saying that you need that. What I'm saying is that at the end of the day, what you're selling is a complete package experience.
Sure.
And
to some degree.
But as in, if you have two places, in one place they have a bad tasting burger and they're selling with the Ballast Point,
sure, versus
if you have a good tasting burger. Because when you're in a group or even on just any random day, there's a lot of different reasons why you go to a restaurant.
Sure.
Or a bar even. Sometimes you go for the food. Sometimes you go because you just need a drink. But what I'm saying is giving a customer more reasons to go never hurts, and especially if you're in a group, right? So for me, I just think it's but it's a better competitive advantage.
Sure. I will agree with you there, but I don't think you need great food to sell craft beer.
Certainly, if you can have it, like no one's going to complain about it, right?
Right.
But very few places, I think anywhere in the world, kind of hit that threshold. And if they do, they're extremely expensive, right? And given, ambiance, location, all those things, there's a reason why expensive places are expensive. And then there's the anomaly dining experiences we talked about, buffets, in particular wedding buffets, bar food, right? Dining outside in like events, concerts, baseball games. There's one more point that I wanted to get to. Breaking news, sort of. It's been a few days by the time this comes out, but the baby ban. Citing an article from KoreaBoo.com, this is actually passed a little while ago, where restaurant owners could ban children from their restaurants. Here's the disclaimer, ladies and gentlemen. None of us are parents. We're all men. Two of us are restaurant owners. So yeah, there's gonna be some bias. Don't you can write it in the comments, but yeah, right now I'm admitting it. There is gonna be bias, but let's try to play devil's advocate. Let's try to see it for what it is. Some people are calling this like a violation of human rights. I think that's a bit much.
That's an exaggeration.
Yeah, I feel like if you own an establishment, you should have the right to refuse service, not based on things like race or gender. Refusing based on age could be a thing for me. I find that much more acceptable.
Well, I mean, I've refused service based on how a person looks. That's actually happened.
Thank you.
That's our first meeting, actually.
If you're tuning in via Just Podcast, you can't actually see Chuck gesturing to Thomas, but that's another story of how they met. We'll get to another time. Obviously, Chuck is just joking. But do you think that you should be able to reserve the right to refuse service in this particular case? Young children, maybe they're being loud, obnoxious, maybe they're not, maybe they're just, you're trying to preserve an ambiance.
I think it's perfectly the right of the establishment to refuse to serve someone on the basis of having children or not. The way that I look at it is, like, once again, I don't have any kids, right? So I'm not really emotionally invested in this issue, but if you look at it sort of logically, businesses are private establishments. They are open to the public, but they are still private. They have the right to serve or not serve whomever they want. And when it comes to children, there may be a lot of reasons for, having a certain position. So, for me, granted, I may not do that. I like to consider that we're a very family-friendly place, but for somebody else, that's a decision for them to make. I don't think it's something that the court should dictate or someone be able to say, oh, it's a human rights violation, especially when there are 1,000 other establishments that they could easily be going to.
Very interesting little wording there to tack on. You could be going somewhere else that does welcome children, right? Of course, that's obvious.
I don't know. For me, I guess it just feels wrong in some way when you have a hard and fast rule that's, that is discriminatory in some way, based on,
of course,
something predetermined, like whether it's race or, children but honestly, I can imagine situations where regardless of, any sort of predetermined thing, you might ask a customer to refrain from something. I know dogs and children are different, but we've had people come in and say, hey, do you guys allow pets? And we don't have a hard and fast rule against pets or for pets. We just say, hey, it really depends on the situation. It really depends on your dog, if it's wet outside, how much of a mess it's going to be.
I feel like this is a pretty valid point.
Right. So for me, I think it's when you say there's no kids allowed, no certain types of people, or then I feel like it feels wrong or unsavory in that way, personally.
But it seems to me that you have to have a very clear position on it, because if you're sort of wishy-washy and it's like sometimes you allow kids and sometimes you don't allow kids, I think
That can be held
that's
against
when-
you.
I think that's when sort of the problems arise. Because I mean, I know at our place we're a very dog-friendly place, so people come in with dogs, they come in with dogs, you know, and we would sort of expect if the dog has sort of an accident on the floor, we would sort of expect that the dog owner, you know, be responsible for that, because that's sort of the understanding with dog-friendly places. But I think, you know, by switching sometimes and you don't, well, then that's when people get upset, because why is it okay for some people and why is it not okay for others? At least if there's a rule or if there's a line, then people know exactly what to expect and they can make a decision based on that.
But here's the gist of it. You're dog friendly, but say, for example, you had a customer with a dog that came into your restaurant and the dog all of a sudden went rabid and he bit another customer, and then you were slapped with a lawsuit. Would you change your position then? Because I think this is what it boils down to, because the courts actually awarded, I think it was like 47 million won
47
and 10
million
million
won
won to another family, because the kids were running around, the parents weren't keeping an eye, but they ran around and they actually got hurt. So the gist of it is, if a dog came into your restaurant and you are dog friendly and they bit a customer of yours, you were slapped with a lawsuit, let's say 50 million won, would you still keep your position as a dog friendly restaurant?
I suppose that's sort of a bridge we would have to cross when we come to it. But in being dog friendly, we would have to ultimately be willing to be responsible, knowing what might happen. Right. So.
Right.
As someone who's never owned a restaurant, I could easily see it just being like, well, then I'm just gonna flip over that rule, right? Because if you really love the restaurant, you'll keep coming, even though it's not personal. I think ultimately what restaurant owners are saying is it's not personal and it's in everyone's best interest, but it is hard to separate that, especially if you're emotionally invested. Like, how is it not personal? They're my kids that you're not letting in.
But from the restaurant's perspective, if they're a small business owner and they have a very small restaurant and their livelihood depends on that restaurant, and all of a sudden they get slapped with a 47 million won lawsuit, that's a huge chunk of money.
That's make or break.
So I can understand it for other small business owners to say, you know what, this could happen to me as well, and I could be out of business with a lawsuit like this. And this is why some of the restaurants are actually taking a stand and saying no children allowed. And in that regards, actually, I do understand where they're coming from.
Great points all around. We're going to move into our final thoughts for now. Where should expectations be at for Seoul foodies, if you prefer to call yourselves that or not? Do you consider them, just expectations in general, relatively low for this city's international status? I think that my expectations as a diner in Seoul are lower than they are in any city that has the same equivalent status.
For Western food.
Yeah, for Western food, not Korean food, obviously.
I would agree with that. Especially, I'm from New York, so New York is the hub of great cuisine from all around the world. It's a melting pot, so when you come from that and you move here to Seoul, it's night and day difference. And so my expectations have much lowered.
Okay. Hallmark of this podcast, things we like. This time around, we're doing anything that's kind of exceeded your expectations, be that a restaurant, a bar, some sort of performing art experience, or what have you. I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Actually, I got dragged out to Gwangjang Xijang a long time ago, and I don't like going to crowded places. I'm not a small person. I don't like standing in lines. And I don't like tourists, and I work in Myeongdong, so it's all bad for me on a daily basis. But Gwangjang Market, it's got all those things, and I was dragged into this line for bindae-dak. I'd never had bindae-dak before. And it's a mung bean pancake, but I liken it to Korea's answer to the hash brown. And I love hash browns, man. And it's served with makgeolli, and I waited, I think, 30 minutes in line.
Wow.
Not that long compared to, some waits at some places, but this is like the food of the people, I would say, right? It's kind of like pojang matcha food, kind of stuff you get when you're drunk or when you're drinking. And this place, Sunine Bindae-dak, I'll find a link, I'll put it in the description, absolutely blew me away. Super cheap. Apparently Tim Burton has been there when he visited Korea highly recommend Sunine Bindae-deok in Gwangjang Market up here in Seoul.
I don't know about anything in specific as far as a specific place, but if I'm not mistaken, I've probably been here longer than the other, the longest out of the four of us. I've been here 11 years. So I've seen sort of the good and the bad, and I've been coming here ever since the 80s. So I saw here when Denny's was here and went out of business, when Wendy's was here and went out of business, and when the first family dining like TGIF, probably in like 84, 85, 86. And when I first came out here 11 years ago, I didn't want to be here, right? I was only supposed to be here for 3 weeks, and that failed. But that said, just the general state of Korea has far exceeded my expectations. Here I am 11 years later, and honestly, I love it here. I think about moving back to the States at times, and I'm just like, I don't really feel the need to live there anymore. I like to visit, and I'd like to get out there as often as I can, but I'm extremely happy here. And I think the changes in food out here play a very big role in that, because if the food weren't good, then I'd just be miserable here.
I agree.
But things have actually really improved, and watching it sort of change all around you, I think that's a really exciting thing as well. So I would just say Seoul has exceeded my expectations.
Wow. Korea Tourism Organization over here.
What can I say? I like it here.
All right, well, that will bring us to a wrap. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search G1 space PDCST. As always, the links are all in the description. Give us a like on Facebook. It's a great way to reach out, give us feedback, interact with us, ask us any questions. For Foodie Call, I'm GP.
I'm Chuck.
I'm Tom.
James.
Catch you in the next one.
사당역입니다. 내리실 건 왼쪽입니다. 잠시 뒤